Hi, my name is Natalie Awash. I'm the Director of State Affairs for Animal Wellness Action and the Center for a Humane Economy. Thank you so much for your dedication to advocate for wild horses. I'm going to do my best to try to prepare you for how to effectively communicate with your legislators as a means to make social change. If you'll bear with me for the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to talk about transforming your world as an advocate and citizen lobbyist. So, why is legislation and regulation so important? And before we get into that, let's actually just take a step back. I'm going to touch on federal and state lobbying today. Of course, I believe your conference is more focused on federal, but I think it's really good to have at least a brief understanding of both. Um, so Congress or our federal representatives, they regulate activities that involve interstate affairs. So an example of that would be something I'm sure you're going to talk about at the conference, the Save America's Forgotten Equines, the SAFE Act. And you'll notice that I put two bill numbers there. So the SAFE Act has currently been introduced in the House of Representatives and the Senate. And so HR 3475, that's the bill number for the House, and that's how they start is HR. And then S, that's how the Senate bill starts. So S 2037. So if you want to read bills, you can just go on congress.gov. And then, if you type in the bill number, it'll come up and allow you to see the bill and also other important information that we don't have time to get into right now. And then states have the authority over intrastate affairs, and every state is different in terms of the term limits and the general legislative process. So we won't get too specific since you're all coming from varying states. But why legislation and regulation? Well, policies get to the root of the problem. So many of our animal issues, if not all of them, I mean, we can't rescue our way out of this. So we need to pass legislation so that we can address, why do we have these issues in the first place and how can we fix that? Similarly, some situations require concrete changes in the law. Animals need protection, of course. And just, keep in mind there's no party lines in animal protection. We work for all animals. We will never be able to make progress for animals if we can't bring both Democrats and Republicans together. So I'm sure everybody here has their own political views, as you should. But when you're advocating for the animals, it's really important to remember that we have to work with anybody and everybody who can help us in our mission. Let's talk about some general tools for effective advocacy and lobbying. So educate yourself on the issues. Of course, you're going to learn so much here at the conference, and you can always research and read more. The organizations attending the conference can be resources to you. Uh, that being said, nobody can be an expert on everything. So I'll get more into this later, but when you're talking to your legislator, it's okay to not have all of the answers, but you do want to be as educated as possible so that you can present yourself as an expert. Of course, we have to know who our legislators are. So you want to put their names, numbers, and emails in your contacts list. I have mine right in my phone. I also have, and we'll talk a lot about staffers today, I also have their staffer contact information. As we'll talk about, those are most of the time, especially if you're talking state and federal, who you're going to be dealing with. Research issues that are important to them. Unfortunately, a lot of people are not swayed to do what we want them to do based on caring about animals. And so, can you find something else that is connected to the issue that we're lobbying for that might sway them? We'll talk about some compelling reasons later, but how do you know what issues are important to them? Go on their website, follow them on social media. That's the best way to really get at the heart of what is important to them. And then you can make those connections between whatever that might be and the animal issue that you're advocating for. Get to know their staffers. I already talked a little bit about that, and we'll talk more about it because it is so, so important. I talked about following them on social media, but also attend their events. I think one of the best ways to build relationships with these legislators is for them to know who you are and be able to put a face to the name. A lot of their events, might be expensive because they might be fundraisers. And so, that may or may not be accessible to you. But almost all legislators will have some events that are either pretty low cost or free to the public, maybe town halls or other, more social things. But try to go to those and be able to connect with your legislators so they can put your face to your name. We want our legislators to know that, we're not the only ones that care about this. And so we have to show that there's broad public support. So this, is demonstrated through calls and emails, or better yet, in-person meetings. Can you find a friend or two, or a family member who's also a constituent of that person to also make a call or send an email? And then keep in mind, the media can really be your friend here. So LTEs, that's letters to the editor, and other opportunities for media attention. Those are really easy ways to be able to educate the public and hopefully get more people on your side. So write letters to the editor of your local newspaper. I try to do at least one a month. And I live in Pittsburgh, so we have several newspapers. So I'll kind of switch up who I'm submitting to, and, educate the public on the issue and put your call to action in there to hopefully inspire readers to contact their legislators as well. Um, I found this really interesting when I was first told it by a legislator, but it really doesn't take that many calls or emails typically to elevate something to a priority. Now, the number may vary depending on if you're talking about a federal representative or a state or local representative, or how big your geographic area is. So when I've polled legislators, the numbers that come back are a little varied, but the average is just 10 calls or emails that elevate something to a priority to that legislator. So just imagine, if you're calling and maybe, your significant other or a few friends, we're almost there, right? That might be 10 if you have a lot of friends. And so just remember your voice matters, and these calls really, really make a difference. It should go without saying, but I don't think it always does. You always want to be polite and respectful. Keep in mind, the goal here is to build a relationship. You are not going to usually get instant gratification when you're advocating or lobbying with legislation. It's a long game. And so you're not always going to get what you want. That's just unrealistic, but you always want to be welcomed back. So I have plenty of legislators I've worked with over the years that don't support the bills I want them to support, or don't vote the way I want them to support. And of course, feel free to express disappointment if and when that happens, but you still always want to be polite. Just imagine, like, the golden rule, right? Treat someone the way you'd want to be treated. No one's going to respond to you or want to build a relationship with you if you're yelling and screaming or angry. So just keep in mind, you always want to make sure that you are able to be welcomed back into their office for the next time that you need or want something. These legislators are busy. I know we all are, but they're hearing about a lot of different things. And so you don't want your call or email to be lost in the shuffle. Now, keep in mind, you don't want to be calling and emailing them every day by any means, but you might need to write or call several times. So typically, what I like to do is establish a timeline for following up. So, if I call or email, usually you're going to be talking to the staffer, and they probably won't know the answer to your question. Or, a lot of times legislators don't want to put a public position out there until they have to. So the staffer might tell you, I don't know if the representative is going to support such and such bill. And that's okay. What I say is, do you know when you'll have an answer for me? And they might say something like, well, I'm going to speak to the representative next Friday. So I just make a note in my calendar that a few business days after that, I'm going to call or email back. And so we're still being polite, right? Because we're respecting their time and the timeline that they gave us, and we're not bugging them. but we're going to try to make sure we're not being forgotten about as well. So, what are the key components of your message? So, if you do call or email, or better yet, have an in person meeting, what is it that you want to say? And I'm going to focus this slide more on calls and emails since that's likely what's going to be most common for you. Uh, Before I get into the specifics, remember to keep it as concise as possible. Your legislators or their staffers are likely not going to read a 10-page email. Do not forget to identify yourself as a constituent. So, dear Representative so and so, my name is, Natalie Ahwesh, and I'm a constituent. I live in the South Side neighborhood of Pittsburgh, or, wherever you live, of course. These people want to hear from constituents because they know that we can vote for them or not, donate money to them or not. So don't forget that part of your message. The name and number of the bill, right? So I'm calling about the SAFE Act, HR 3475, or, whatever it is. Don't forget to ask for support or opposition because they're likely hearing from people on both sides. So, say what you want them to do. I want you to support this bill. I want you to co sponsor this bill. Easy as that. Explain what the bill does. Remember to be brief. So, I would say this is one or two sentences on what the bill does. If you're working with an organization that has a fact sheet, that's something maybe you could attach. If you're sending an email or if you're making a call, could say that you want to get an email address to send a fact sheet. But your message should be more concise than that. Why does this issue matter to you? Again, be brief, be concise. I have share your story because if you can make it personal, that's a way to really connect with your legislator, humanize yourself. So maybe you have a personal reason for why this bill is important. If not, that's okay. But if you can make it personal, that's always a good thing. And then maybe there are other compelling reasons, which I'll get into some examples in a moment. But this goes back to researching your legislators and understanding what's important to them. Right? Are they someone who cares about the environment? Are they someone who cares about veterans? Or whatever it is? Can you connect the issue you're advocating for to something outside of just animals? Someone told me this once, it really stuck with me. Your legislator is either your friend or someone else's friend, and we want them to be our friend. Okay, so I said this before, but I'll reiterate because it's so important. Get to know your elected officials by subscribing to their email list. That'll help educate you on what's important to them and also let you know if there's events that you can go to in the district. Um, and make appointments to discuss animal welfare concerns. So we're talking a lot about emails and phone calls today. And if you're not comfortable with in-person meetings yet, that's completely understandable, but it probably is the best way to connect with your legislators. So maybe if you're not ready for that after you do a few phone calls and emails, you could be. Or if you're interested in setting a meeting in person or virtual with your legislator, you might be able to find someone from an organization who's an expert on the issue to attend with you, like Animal Wellness Action or the other groups at the conference. So, what are those compelling reasons, right? We talked about a personal story, if you can make the issue personal to you. Um, but what else? Well, saving taxpayer dollars, right? Most legislators want to be able to tell their constituents that they're being fiscally responsible. So, can you connect your issue to something that's going to save taxpayer money? Is there a benefit or harm to the environment? A lived experience. This, I guess, basically is the same thing as the personal story. Can you make a case for the bill that you're advocating for or against, being good for business and public relations? Maybe human health and safety, right? A lot of people don't care much about animals, but they'll care about humans. So can you connect it there? And then I really feel like any animal bill I've worked on, you can make an argument to both Republicans and Democrats as to why they should support it. So keep in mind that these issues almost always are nonpartisan or can be conveyed that way and are a way to establish common ground, right? So if you're talking to a Republican, maybe they want to be able to appeal to their Democratic constituents or vice versa. And supporting animal bills can be a way to do that. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person to answer real questions, but I put together a slide of some frequently asked ones. So hopefully something you're thinking might be on here. What legislators should you know? Well, we're talking a lot about federal legislation. So, federally, we all have one US representative and two senators. So, they're definitely people that you want to know. At the state level, I put state representative and state senator. I live in Pittsburgh and in Pennsylvania, and we have one of each, but other states may vary. They might not be called that. So, your state representatives, and of course, your local ones, if you're talking about local advocacy, could vary. How do you find out who they are or how to contact them? Google is your friend, of course, and there's a million websites out there that can help you with it. But Open States and USA.gov are two of my favorites. So actually, I just wanted to take a minute to show you now. So bear with me. So I went ahead and Googled find my legislators and I came up to the USA.gov website. And I'm just going to put in my address. And this is actually an old address, but that's okay. And one of the reasons I like this site is it's really comprehensive. So, okay, we've got, our federal representatives. That's a lot of who we're talking about at the conference, your state people, and then your local people. So let me just click on federal. And of course, it's going to have, like our president and vice president there. But there's our two US senators in Pennsylvania, and then, my US representative in Congress. And I like this site too because it's easy. Like, I'm just going to click on John Fetterman. I can see that's the one of the phone numbers. There's more, but I can get to his website easily. I don't know how comprehensive this is, but some of the social media handles for representatives will be on here. So you can follow them on, X or Instagram or Facebook or whatever. Remember, that's a good way to find out about their events and see what's important to them. And then I'll just briefly touch on state. So I'm going to click state. And, of course, this is going to vary greatly depending on where you are. I mentioned in Pennsylvania, we have one state representative and one state senator, right? So I would, here's mine, state representative, state senator. And again, if I just click, you can see, a lot of information. I can look at social media handles and get to their website and things like that. Okay. Of course, this is not going to give you information on their staffers, but you can get to know the staffers and who they are by making contact with just generically the office at first. And I also have another tip for you to find out about staffers that I'll talk about at the end of the presentation. Okay, so going back to the training. Hey, so do you call their local or federal capital office? So let's break this down into state and federal for a moment. So if you're talking state, and again, I'm just going to use state representative and state senators because that's what I have in Pennsylvania. Um, they're all going to have offices in your state capital. So for me, that's Harrisburg. And then also one or more local offices. So like my state representative and state senator have an office in Harrisburg, also Pittsburgh and others as well. So if you're making initial contact, right, if you don't already have established relationships and know the email addresses of the staffers, which do you call? It usually depends on the preference of the legislator. I would say I typically start with the district office because that's just more localized, and I feel like it's easier to build a relationship with those people. They're dealing with less constituents. But they may tell you to call the office in Harrisburg or the state capital. So as you kind of just get involved with this, you'll figure out which office you connect with to have the better response rate. Okay. Keep in mind when you call, regardless of which office it is, make sure you're being polite and professional and getting to know the people answering the phone. What's their name? Right? You want to be on that personal basis with them. Now, for our federal representatives, right, they all have an office in Washington, D.C. And then they also have local district offices. So, like, my people will have Washington, D.C., Pittsburgh, and then, wherever else around the state or their district. And I personally would start with the district office for the federal people. If you call Washington, D.C., you're likely not going to get in touch with a human being. So I would start at the district office where they're dealing with less constituents. But again, same rules apply. Get to know those staffers. Whoops. Does your call matter if you only speak to a staffer? Absolutely. That's usually who you're going to talk to. Maybe not if you're dealing with local or some state reps. Some state reps actually don't even have staffers. I think that's pretty rare. But absolutely, it does. Are emails, letters, petitions, or there should be a space there, or phone calls more effective? Um, So the most effective is the in-person or virtual meetings, right? Again, so they can see your face and it's just more personal. Understanding we can't always do that, or we or they are not always able to be accessed. I think emails, as long as you're connecting with the right person. So keep in mind, all of these representatives on their website are going to have these contact forms. Those are going to be completely generic. Most of these contact forms you have to pick from a drop down with like the topic of why you're emailing, so animal welfare or whatever, and you're just going to get a generic canned response back. That's not what we want. It doesn't hurt anything to send those, so you're welcome to, but we want to be emailing like an actual human being. So that's why you need to get to know those staffers, right? So I would say for most legislators, in my experience, having the staffer email address and being able to email them directly is the most effective after the in-person or virtual meeting. After that would be phone calls. And a lot of times, the staffers are just kind of like tallying up, like, oh, we got 5 calls today for you to support the SAFE Act, or, whatever. Letters, like in the mail, I would stay away from those. With security the way that it is, a lot of these letters, especially if you're sending to federal, they have to be scanned for anthrax and things like that. It can take weeks for your letter to actually get to them. Um, the only exception I would say is I always send my legislators a holiday card and a handwritten thank you card if they do something that I, want, if they voted the way that I want on a bill, for example, because those aren't really time sensitive, right? And I do think they're a nice personal touch. Your legislators don't get many of them. I went to a legislative office once and they had my holiday card hanging up, which was exciting. But again, if it's a time sensitive ask, that's not the best way to get information to them. And then those petitions, I've heard mixed things from legislators on the petitions that a lot of organizations will ask you to sign. I would say at least 90% of the representatives I've talked to don't care at all about those petitions. They virtually ignore them. They feel like, a lot of times the people signing them aren't even constituents. I've been told, if people can't take the time to write or call with a personal message, like, I'm not going to waste my time looking at this. There have been a handful of legislators over the years that have told me that, that not that they're very meaningful, but that they will at least use them to gauge how popular something is. So if they get 10,000 petitions or signatures on a petition in support of an issue versus 1,000 against, right, they'll consider that. But it's not a substitute for that personal touch. So if you do want to fill out those petitions, go for it, but don't let that be in place of an email or a phone call. What if they ask a question that you don't know the answer to? Remember, we talked about educating yourself on the issue, but you can't be an expert and know all of the answers to everything. So that's totally fine. What you don't want to do is lie, because if you lie and they find out, you have, forever discredited yourself from being a resource for them. So if they ask you something that you don't know the answer to, just be honest. Say, I don't know, but I will find out for you. And then you can contact one of the organizations leading on this issue and get the answer. Sometimes I think this is a nice thing when this happens because it gives you an excuse to follow back up, right? I say, I don't know, but I'll find out and let you know. And then I have an automatic reason to reach back out to them and say, hey, remember me? We talked about such and such. Well, I found this out and I wanted to let you know, and, whatever else. Please keep in mind, when bills are introduced, they go to a committee and they have to be voted out of the committee to get to the full floor. Thousands of bills are introduced. I'm talking federal every year, and there's only a few that are voted on. Most of them are going to die in committee, right? And we have to just keep reintroducing them over and over every session. So we really have to be persistent and, unfortunately, patient, right? Legislation is a long game. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that some of this was informative. Um, Please feel free to reach out to me for anything. Again, my name is Natalie Ahwesh, and I can be reached at nahwesh at animalwellnessaction.org. One other thing I wanted to mention, I talked about getting to know the staffers. So you can definitely get to know the staffers just by calling the office, going to events, and building this organic relationship, and that's great. But if you contact me and let me know what representative or what legislator you're looking to connect with, I can often assist you in finding the specific information for the appropriate staffer, especially federal. A lot of them have, dozens of staffers. And so you want to make sure you're connecting with the right one. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you need assistance making sure that you're connecting with the appropriate staffer. Good luck with your lobbying and have a wonderful time at the conference.